Today, we are diving deep inside a pretty intense press conference at the Federal Reserve. With the economy feeling like it's on a knife's edge, Fed Chair Jerome Powell just faced some serious questions. We're going to break down what he said and maybe what he didn't say to figure out what's really happening. Okay, so let's get right into it. The main question everyone's asking is pretty simple. With all this economic chaos, why did the Fed decide to just sit on its hands? They kept their key policy rate exactly where it was. So we're going to walk through the toughest questions reporters threw at Powell to really understand the thinking behind this high-stakes waiting game. First up, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, inflation. The economy has been getting hit by one shock after another, right? From tariffs to oil prices spiking because of conflict in the Middle East, all of this makes the Fed's job of trying to guide the economy unbelievably difficult. So Colby Smith from the New York Times just cuts right to the chase here. Look, the usual playbook says the Fed should just ignore temporary spikes in oil prices. But his question is, can you really do that when inflation has been this stubborn, this persistent for like 5 years now? It's a fantastic question because it really gets at the Fed's biggest challenge right now, its own credibility. And here's Powell's response. He basically admits, yeah, it's not just one thing, it's a repeated set of things. Now, the key phrase here, the one you really need to pay attention to, is inflation expectations. He's worried that if you and I and everyone else just gets used to higher prices, we start acting like it's the new normal, and boom, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's really concerned that people might stop believing the Fed can actually hit its 2% inflation target. So to explain this, Powell tries to draw a clear line. He says things like, tariffs are just a one-time price shock. Think of it like a sudden speed bump. It jolts prices up once, but it doesn't keep pushing them up month after month. That, he says, is totally different from real inflation, which is that slow, steady, frustrating climb in prices we see year after year. It's a technical distinction, sure, but for any of us at the grocery store, it all just feels like things are more expensive. He's betting these are just temporary problems, but he also admits he has no idea when they'll actually fade. And all of this brings us to the Fed's fundamental problem. They have two main jobs, right? Keep prices stable and make sure people can find work. But right now, those two goals are in a serious tug of war, and the Fed is stuck right in the middle, trying to keep both sides from pulling the economy apart. So then Nick Timiraos from the Wall Street Journal, a guy who's known for being incredibly plugged into the Fed, asks the million-dollar question. He's basically saying, look, with all these confusing signals, why should anyone believe that your plan is actually going to work? And Powell's answer really lays out this core conflict perfectly. On one hand, if the job market gets weaker, that would scream cut interest rates to give the economy a boost. But on the other hand, stubbornly high inflation suggests they should raise rates or at least keep them high to cool things down. So yeah, they are caught between a rock and a hard place. And here's the number that's really keeping them up at night, 3%. That's the core PCE inflation rate. It's the Fed's favorite inflation gauge because it smooths out the noisy food and energy prices. But the problem is, it's still a full percentage point higher than their 2% goal. And that right there is the main reason they're not even thinking about cutting rates, even if the job market starts to look a little wobbly. Okay, this brings us to what was really the climax of the whole press conference. A reporter finally dared to say the S word. Stagflation. That is the absolute nightmare scenario for any central banker, and it brings back some really bad memories of the 1970s economy. The question came from Maria Luisa Catarano of Bloomberg News, and it was direct. She basically asked, are you guys even talking about the risk of stagflation? High inflation and a stagnant economy happening at the same time? Now you have to watch what Powell does here. It's pretty smart. He immediately defines stagflation on his terms. He ties it specifically to the really extreme conditions of the 1970s. We're talking double-digit unemployment and just insane inflation. This is a classic move, right? Control the narrative by setting a really, really high bar for what the word even means. And then he lays out the comparison. He says, look at the 70s, terrible unemployment, crazy high inflation. Now look at today. Unemployment is still pretty low, and inflation is, well, it's elevated, but it's only about a point above our target. By framing it this way, he's basically arguing that, yeah, things are tough, but we are nowhere near the kind of catastrophe that the word stagflation implies. So you might be asking, is this just a clever way to dodge the question? And, you could argue that. He's carefully sidestepping that stagflation landmine by just relabeling the problem. He's saying, look, it's not a five-alarm fire. It's just a very difficult situation where our two main goals are clashing. He's admitting there's a problem, for sure, but he's framing it as a tough puzzle to solve, not an economic disaster. So after all of that, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves the Federal Reserve in this state of pretty profound uncertainty. Their official policy is basically just watchful waiting. They're going to wait and see what happens next. And in a moment of just incredible honesty, Powell admitted just how foggy the future really is. He said that if they were ever going to just skip releasing their official economic forecasts, that's the SCP, this would be the time to do it because, in his own words, we just don't know. You almost never hear a Fed chair be that blunt about how uncertain things are. So here's the official game plan going forward. It's pretty straightforward. Step 1, they're going to watch all the incoming data. Step 2, they'll figure out what it means for the future. And step 3, they'll keep doing this tightrope walk, balancing the risks. The bottom line is nothing is set in stone. Which leaves us with the big final question hanging in the air. In an economy where even the guy in charge admits we just don't know, what on earth are they looking for? What signal, what piece of data will be enough to finally make them act? That, right now, is the great unknown.